Did you hear it? Well, I wonder if maybe we...
Yeah, well, I'll okay, yeah. And then, do you want to talk about it? Okay. Darn. Okay, well, look, the point is that you would say that sort of the version of the Judeo-Christian belief is not there are other philosophies that are different, and this is the problem. It's innate human characteristics. You might say greed, xenophobia, etc. And how can science be non-rational? Okay, so let me. There are two parts, and I want to say one part which will be very unpopular. I don't think Buddhism is any different than the other religions. I think it's in fact just as pervasively bad, in my opinion. I think it's based on the Buddhist. If you read the Buddha, he said, you know what, you shouldn't try and understand anything. It's not important. I was on a panel recently in Davos with, and it sounds like a bad joke, I was on with a priest, a rabbi, a nun, and a monk. And we all went to a bar. And, but the most irrational person was the monk, in fact, who said, science is the problem. Science is the problem because you try and think. And in fact, it's responsible for distortions in the classroom. In any case, the bottom line is that what we're arguing against, and I think, is irrationality, or at least the fact that we don't recognize that we are irrational. And where science can help, in my opinion, is to better understand ourselves. And to better understand, we had at the institute I run, the Origins Project, we had a whole meeting on the origins of xenophobia. It's an innate part of everything from cells. It's important for cells to recognize foreign invaders. From biochemistry all the way up to humans, xenophobia is a useful, evolutionarily useful thing, but it's become culturally maladaptive. And so the only way we can try and address, it seems to me, these issues is to understand ourselves better, to understand how to deal with it. And so and there's an old saying, I'm an educator, that if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But to me, it's education. Understanding is the only way to ultimately deal with the realization that we are not innately just rational beings. There's much more to us than that. I don't know if you want to... Okay, one question.
Next question.
Anyone up there that I can't see? Okay, right here, second row.
We can't all become experts on every subject in the modern world. It's just too much. So at some point, you have to make decisions about what's reasonable and what isn't. But we all do that, even as scientists. We're not experts on even all aspects of our own field. So we have to make some decisions about with you're a scientist, belief is not a part of science. It's what's likely and what's more likely and what's less likely. So it's more likely that when I'm talking about the universe, because that's what I study, that I might have something to say instead of, what's that con artist that guy's working on here that we were talking? Deepak Chopra, who was here. And so when he talks, you should just ignore him because he clearly doesn't know anything. And he's out to make money from it. But so you have to, at some point, decide what's likely or unlikely. But the point is to keep questioning. If it doesn't seem reasonable to you, then you should start to look up and see, explore that question more firmly. You should decide if it's not reasonable to you, as we often say, I'd like to keep an open mind, but not so open that my brains fall out. And I think that's very important, but it also puts onus on us. I think very much more important is a much greater responsibility. I know Richard, who I've always admired for a long time for his writing about science. When I say something, people believe it, because I could say quarks are made of little white elephants and people would believe it. So it's extremely important, if you're popularizing science, to try very, very hard to not knowingly mislead.
As a non-physicist, I don't understand quantum theory. But I know that those people who work on quantum theory are subject to the discipline of science. They peer review each other's papers. The experimental results which verify the predictions of quantum theory to a quite staggering degree of accuracy can be repeated by other physicists and will be if the results are sufficiently important. I think Richard Feynman said that some of the predictions of quantum theory, if you look at the number of decimal places that they're accurate to, it's equivalent to predicting the width of North America to the width of one human hair. Now that's impressive. I don't understand the theory, but I do understand that that prediction is very, very impressive, whereas the equivalent level of mystery in theology, like the mystery of the transubstantiation of things, which sounds perhaps as mysterious as some quantum theory, that doesn't make predictions at all. That's just out of thin air and has absolutely no correspondence to reality whatever. Quantum theory really works.
I think that's, Richard really hit the key point to answer your question in a sense. The reason you can sort of have some quote-unquote faith is that every day there are lots of people in my field who are trying to prove me wrong. And it's different than in religion, where they're all sort of this secret handshake and everyone agrees to the same thing. And so that there is this natural mechanism. The big misunderstanding of science is that, in fact, the reason people don't trust evolution is they somehow think we have something to gain. We don't want anyone to prove it wrong, when in fact, if you could, that's the way to become famous, is by proving what I do every day is try and go into work and prove my colleagues wrong. Because that's, first of all, the way we make progress. So I think you can at least accept the fact that there's a peer review, there's this mechanism by people who may understand it better than you, if I believe myself to be a credible scientist and I write some fairy tale, I lose total credibility among my colleagues. They're the first people who are going to condemn me. So anyway, at least science is a self-regulating discipline, and that is perhaps the most important thing that differentiates science from religion. That's it. Thank you.